Clamper glogos kent ach luachon ol gudoni wai muiteresh no ganari chors gudai war oh so yes gudo islam so pogomovian.
Second bite at the apple of history. Yet, if we sidestep what were largely propaganda-driven or interest-driven narratives, there was plenty of analysis at the time, warning against war, aware of its true origins, and prescient about what would be its consequences. And once the guns began to thunder, few, if any, of those involved in the killing, maiming, and dying had any illusions at all about what was really happening. In the words of French Second Lieutenant Alfred Joubert, writing in his diary about World War I just before he was killed, humanity is mad. It must be mad to do what it is doing. What a massacre. What scenes of horror and carnage. I cannot find words to translate my impressions. Hell cannot be so terrible. Men are mad.
A soft, calm, beautiful night in May. I was outside the house leaning on the double wall of the little garden which my father and I had fashioned out of the limestone rocks that once formed the yard of our home. A nice little garden it was for America. Sounds of revelry came from the kitchen. Martin Dick's melodeon was given out the road to the wedding, Miss MacLeod's reel and the Connachtman's rambles. We could hear the clatter of hobnail boots on the earthen floor and the shuffling of pampooties. Shouts of encouragement came from the onlookers and cries of challenge from the dancers who looked upon this form of amusement as a test of staying power.
The lad from the Shankill who joined in order to fulfil some fantasy of soldiering died in the same mud as the farm labourer from Kerry who needed the army's pitiful pay, and both left their sacrificed bodies on the same barbed wire as did a deluded 17-year-old apprentice from Marseille, a railway apprentice from Stuttgart, or some bewildered Malaysian infantryman far, far away from home. By objective analysis, this readiness to pursue politics by means of war was a project of that power elite who stood most to benefit from the spoils. The armaments manufacturers, of course, but also that large class of investors who sought markets, materials and profits by the retention of or expansion into political or mercantile imperial possessions.
The beach to the Scalp War. I picked up a piece of driftwood. What ship did it form part of? Where was this ship wrecked? Well, this little bit of wood was about to end its career as tinder. It would find its way to the hearth of some house in Gurtnagoppel and burn into ashes. It would be thrown out on the dung heap and in the spring would be spread on a garden as fertiliser.
It is next to impossible to take an independent stance of mind to resist the orthodoxy of the given moment. Here in Ireland, James Connolly certainly seems to have had a clear and consistent understanding that the Great War, in its conception and in its bloody flowering, was no more than a war between capitalist powers for a control of resources, a war between empires which would have no outcome in the expansion of post-war social justice, but would instead result in a widening and deepening of injustice and exploitation.
Mar sanne vi drill ek skine le harun shave bi aringalu vi kursi stier fraguns near ventra fali.
Cabinets who rule the destinies of nations from the various capitals of Europe are but the tools of the moneyed interest. Their quarrels are not dictated by sentiments of national pride or honour, but by the avarice and lust of power on the part of the class to which they belong. The people who fight under their banners in the various armies or navies do indeed imagine they are fighting the battles of their own country. But in what country has it ever happened that the people have profited by foreign conquest? Germany was racing ahead as an industrial power, largely as a result of carefully retained capital and a skilled and hard-working working class. And at the same time, union membership had leaped from 851,000 in 1900 to 3,024,000 in 1913, a fact that gave pause for thought to a ruling class all too aware of the lessons of 1905 in Russia, including the great risings and demonstrations of workers there, and in particular the Kronstadt Mutiny. There was every possibility that the increasing power of the unions would form the base for a revolutionary insurrection, a possibility that would be neatly forestalled by embarking on a war.
Agus nishe fishe blie, nishe manafro.
Bhí an lách a ciún agus iad a siar faoi bhun na heile, ná'r fris gob na corí cwpan cwr ei bhar na faragi.
Bhí corcan na spéir ag an smál.
Just frusta chuibe bheith
Agus yn sin anig robbeir yn nair
Hánig sé an leir óáil an ára, agus an nua me crechan na spéir.
Agus da lás sin arigi, nír an e fesgin teach an cwr gael a geirir i darchatas. Tair si gael yn nanach yn e geirir sa faragi hof.
Agus níor fríú riamh.
Níor fríú gillis ma frígus ma siúr mar. Tá nua báte chawn na mara agus ma chrís a báte leo. Oh, mo fron.
Gallant little Belgium, for instance, in whose defence so many were exhorted to volunteer, was a vicious colonial power, barbaric and inhuman in its treatment of the people of the Congo. Reports have come to light in the last 20 years, for instance, of thousands of children having their hands amputated to punish their parents for refusing to work in the Belgian rubber plantations. You can go online and see a room this size, filled, a pile that would fill this room of hands of children. That said, I want to hammer home one simple and brutal fact. It was the poor of the world, overwhelmingly, who did the killing and dying in this unspeakable war.
Agus yn chintig to fi goffor test y ffyrn i iatach bydd to ach fi efer hyn o'n ffyr y ffordd agus nyr i llawn sydd clor fi ro sort deiar o tychylw fi liawf wedi to llawn sydd test o'r fi agus i mwyn agus sa'n chaint o'r breo wedi to agus hasha mihol fi o'n agus hasha sŵs agus i cyrd ar y I'r ôl fel ysgli, sy'n siarad i hap, agus dim yn clor ffri digantol. Ach, fer beg o hain Chinese, agus cyrw clor ar y ffri chwyd lot achyd, agus dwi'n sia. Wel, dwi'n sia, fi chaint o'r tyffwyd i'r sia, a fi'n stawr sia loffo. Snach hol yn mysio ffyr.
What must that have been like? What was it like to know, deep in your bones and in your very soul, that to the commanders, to the politicians at home, to the pressmen who whip up the war hysteria, the women who hand out the white feathers, men who sell to the armies, the gun in your hand, the scant food in your belly, the uniform rotting on your body, the guns and shells that make the thunder, the lethal mechanical shattering machine guns, the cursed barbed wire, that invention of the devil, the men who profit from the very stretcher you might just be carried back on should you be lucky enough to be wounded, found and carried back. To know that to all these you are lower than an animal, of less value than a mule or a horse. To know that to all these you are no more than the lowest of the brutes. What must that have been like?